Now, just for clarification, the Stark Law has nothing to do with Iron Man. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
It is not the Tony Stark Law.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax, HIPAA help is on the way.
This is Valerie Williams from Arthritis and Rheumatology of Georgia in Atlanta, Georgia. And you are listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast.
Welcome to episode 298 of the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. My name is David Sims of HIPAA for MSPs, and joining me is Donna Grindle of Carden. Good morning, Donna.
Good morning, David.
I guess it would be slightly good afternoon since it's just past 12.
I know. we got too much going on.
I know. So today we're going to talk about the HIPAA Summit, the 2021 version. I think it was the 13th annual?
30th.
30th annual?
It's
Wow.
the 30th HIPAA Summit. They used to do them twice a year.
Okay. So you attended that this week.
Yes.
And funny because every time I would contact you, you're like, I can't right now. I'm in a session.
That is the longest one I've been going since 2012, every single year. And they'd be like a day and then 2 half days or 2 days and a half day. This year, for as long as I've been going, 4 full days and a half day. Well, wait, 3 full days and a half day. Because today would be the 4th day.
So did you feel like those people that come to our boot camp? Were you drinking from a fire hose the whole time?
Yeah, a little bit. So, yeah, and to be like, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about there. At least for the most part, I gleaned a vast amount of information. And for people who are like, why do you go? And I'm like, 'cause you're about to find out why I go.
Yeah. And every year we come back and we do an episode on this.
We try to, yeah.
And so we're going to do that today. Actually, not just today, because there's so much information. This will be part 1 of this.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
yeah, with that much, there's so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't expand because there were sessions. And I mean, practically every single session I could get something out of.
Good. Got your money's worth.
Yeah, and they did tons of the little breakout sessions, or as they call them, mini summits.
Oh.
That now I got to go back and catch the recordings of the ones I couldn't go to because the ones I was going to, I needed to be in. And there's some of those where I was like, okay, this one takes priority. I really want to be in all 3. So there's more for me to learn, to share, to learn.
Wow.
Yeah. How about that?
Sounds like a lot. And we are definitely going to get into it. So we're going to kind of fast pace this one today, but we do want to remind everybody the HIPAA Bootcamp virtual edition, August 17 through 19. If you tried to register recently, we did find, actually somebody found a glitch in the program, in the matrix.
That's what happens when you set up new things.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how it came about because I was scratching my head on, I don't know, something updated and disconnected and integration or whatever, but we don't know, but it's fixed. And you should be able to now purchase there. So if you've run into any problems, go back, try it again. If you still run into problems, which you shouldn't, send me an email. Let me know. I shall get it fixed for you.
If you don't have any problems, send him an email, tell him all about a problem that you had, and then at the end say, April Fools.
Oh, it's getting close to that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this comes out the day after April Fools, and somebody asked me to do like a little Q&A, lunch and learn kind of thing, and I'm like, you sure you want me to do it on April Fools? Because some of the stuff I say, people sometimes think I'm kidding, but I'm not.
Yeah, they're like, oh, that's funny. This whole HIPAA thing, that's just a joke, right?
Yeah. Yuck.
All right. Be sure to share this episode and like it and give us a review on it. And thanks again for our donors. We definitely appreciate your support as always. So let's dive into the HIPAA
Say what?
segment because we have 2 questions that came in
Yeah.
since last week. And both very different and from different people as far as what they do for a living.
Yeah.
So let's get into this.
Yeah, so we do have to make note that we got somebody in trouble one time, apparently,
Uh-oh.
because they asked us a question and we used their name. And then for some reason, their higher ups heard about it and didn't like it.
Oh,
So we will no longer use full names
okay.
unless you explicitly say, go ahead and use my full name.
All right.
We will not. And sorry for getting you in trouble, because
That was not our intention.
never was. So we can't give you a specific shout out, but to Jennifer, shout out.
You know who you are.
Yeah. Thanks for connecting on LinkedIn, and nice to know that you're out there. So Jennifer sends in and says, or David, do you want to read it or you want me to read it?
Sure, I'll read it in my
Okay.
best female voice.
Like mine's so much better. Yeah.
I've recently begun listening to your podcast and find them so helpful. I'm a new office manager and of less than a year, trying to improve HIPAA compliance in our program. So good. She also writes, would a company like Payspan, who we receive payments from, be considered a business associate? The insurance company, I believe, contracts them to provide payment information.
So the answer is probably not. But as always, maybe. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, next question.
We're moving on. All right. So, depending on the services they provide, they could be ABA. Remember, financial transactions don't fall under. So, like the credit card companies aren't BAs and the banks aren't BAs as long as all they're doing is processing your payments. So, that's the maybe part. But the most important part for you, Jennifer, is to know that if the insurance company is contracting with them, they would not be your BA. That would fall to the insurance company to worry about. As long as the insurance company tells you to work with them and you confirm that, the BAA connects the service provider to a company that hires them to provide a service. And then once that exists, they act on their behalf.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple business associates can work together on behalf of the same covered entity or upstream BA. They can work together on a project and not have to have a separate contract between them as long as there's a contract they're both connected to, the same CE or upstream BA. Hopefully that made sense. Did you agree with the answer, David?
Absolutely. I agreed with it. It is definitely a fact-specific determination. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a downstream, two steps down. And so you don't have to deal with it. It's like us as an IT provider. The covered entities have a business associate agreement with us, but they don't have one directly with our vendors that are actually housing their data.
Right. Same kind of concept.
Yep. So that responsibility is on us to have that.
Yeah. So the insurance company is a covered entity. You're a covered entity. You're allowed to exchange information with them for processing the P of TPO. And then the Payspan is contracted by the covered entity. So there you go.
Yep. So,
all right. The
like
next one, David, I'm going to let you read this one just so that I hear the tone in your voice when it comes out. I want to hear this one when you read it.
All righty. This one comes from John. So John writes, Dear Diary. No, he writes, is there a specific HIPAA rule regarding patched or maybe a fine levied against someone for unpatched computers and Windows 7? I'm dealing with an IT guy insisting that this is not addressed in HIPAA. Okay. So
let's take a deep breath.
Yeah. It's like, So I would recommend that the IT guy go to HIPAA for MSPs and sign up. He definitely needs to remove the ignorance, the willful ignorance that he
And it
has.
sounds like a confident ignorance.
Yes.
Misunderstanding is beyond that if he is insisting that it's
Yeah.
not addressed in HIPAA.
Yeah. Especially considering he probably knows nothing about HIPAA. Anyway.
Well, he thinks he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give him a piece of paper and a pen and see if he spells it correctly first, and then go from there.
Okay. Are you finished venting?
Yeah, no, I'm not. But so, as Donna would say, we love this argument when it comes in.
Not.
No, we hate it.
It's the IT expert being the HIPAA expert, which is another rant that I'll save for later about lawyers being security experts. But let's move on.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: is it's instead of this IT person saying to John, "Here's my proof that this doesn't apply," what he's doing is he's tasking John with going out and figuring out the work and then coming back and proving his point.
Well, because clearly the IT guy is very confident that he's correct.
Mm-hmm.
No need to prove it.
And probably, and I'm certainly inferring here, but probably because somebody on a webinar told him that was the case.
Or a forum.
Right. Like somebody
Went and
somewhere
asked.
told him. He didn't go read it for himself. Somebody that he thinks knows something about HIPAA probably told him that.
Well, and here's the other thing is these are IT providers interpreting the law. And the way they did it is they searched the law for patching and software upgrades or something like that. That's not going to be in there.
They went to find, they typed in Windows 7 and like, look, HIPAA says nothing about Windows 7.
Or patching. It never uses the word patch. It never uses that at all.
Right. So what we do though is we look at OCR resolution agreements and settlements that have happened in the past because they shed light on what it is they expect from people.
Mhm.
Right? I mean,
Legal opinions and lawyers' opinions tell you how the law is interpreted,
mhm,
not IT providers.
mhm.
Unless they have, I reference this, or I listen to Help Me with HIPAA, and if you want to know more, you should listen to Help Me with HIPAA too.
Yeah. So anyway, going way back, because we're going to get into the Wayback Machine, and we're going to take you all the way back to 2014.
Yes.
Yes, sir. That's right. That's what I said. 2014, there was an OCR resolution agreement that specifically addressed patching.
And outdated Windows.
Yes.
It related to a Windows XP case.
Mm-hmm.
There will likely be one eventually for a Windows 7 case, but that's so new, it wouldn't have made it through things yet.
Well, there's
a case.
That's been an argument though that I've been dealing with for a while, because when all this shift happened and brought IT companies underneath HIPAA, when that happened, I had a lot of people going, well, show me in the law, or show me where there's a case or a fine against an IT company. And I'm like, this is 2014, 2015. I'm like, there's not one because it's too new. It's going to take a long time before something comes out, unless you just happen to hear about it while it's happening.
Yeah.
Now we're starting to see those things, but even now there's still people saying, well, show me where an MSP got fined for something, that's just like us or whatever.
Well, and the thing I always ask is, it only matters if you get fined?
Yeah, because, okay, here's the
So
thing.
protecting patients and protecting your business, not necessary.
Yeah.
It's the least of your worries.
I live in a neighborhood where the speed limit's 25. Okay.
Mhm.
There are no posted signs, but by default, it's 25 through here. There's never been, I am pretty sure, because I would probably have noticed it, there's never been anybody stopped for doing 100 miles an hour on my street. But that's still against the law.
And if they were to hit somebody going 100 miles an hour on your street, they wouldn't get a speeding ticket.
Mm-mm.
That would not be the fine. It would mitigate the damage. I mean, it would aggravate the damage. It would make the damage worse because you weren't following the law.
Right. So just because somebody's never been stopped for doing 100 miles an hour on my street does not mean it's okay to do 100 miles an hour on my street.
Yeah. In a very simplistic approach.
Yes.
So let's talk about this case.
Yeah, we'll dive into it just a little bit.
Well, the important part is it's the Alaska Health Department, I think is what it is. We'll give you a link to the 2014 case, the ACMHS, Alaska something community. I don't know. It's their health department.
Yeah.
And here, this goes back to our friend Jocelyn Samuels being the ACR director.
We hadn't heard from Jocelyn in a long time.
Yeah. And we didn't even have the podcast when this one came out. So let's talk about David's favorite part, the quote that tells you the point they're trying to make.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Jocelyn Samuels, she says, successful HIPAA compliance requires a common sense approach to assessing and addressing the risk to EPHI on a regular basis. This includes reviewing systems for unpatched vulnerabilities and unsupported software that can leave patient information susceptible to malware.
Susceptible.
Successful to malware and other risks. And no, she didn't screw it up as much as I did.
No, I mean, if you go read, there's other cases that mention unsupported software or unpatched vulnerabilities, but this one is specifically calling it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, and you both of us saw the question and went straight to this case, which is scary by itself that we both remembered something that old prior to us having the podcast. But that clearly means we've had to reference it before, probably for the same case or the same type of question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like the first part of this, which says successful HIPAA compliance requires a common sense approach. I would stop right there because most people lack common sense.
He still gets frustrated on this one. He's had a hard day, people.
Yeah.
We're sorry.
There we go. That's what we say. We're just going to come out and start saying, look, we provide the common sense that you need for your successful HIPAA program.
Help me with common sense. There's our new name.
Hey, I love it.
All right, there you go. And then there's us who sometimes will do the stupidest thing because I'll try it. But here's the thing that matters to get back to the point of them looking at the law and then not seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is the director who is, the directors are always attorneys, and the attorneys write all this stuff and interpret the law and then present it to administrative judges and so on and so forth. In this case, they only fined him $150,000, which is because they are a nonprofit.
Okay.
So nonprofits can be subject to HIPAA. Let's get that in there. But the other piece in here, when it mentions how they violated the law, it was they didn't do the risk analysis and risk management, which an unsupported, unpatched software or operating system would fall under a risk or a threat or vulnerability on your risk analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And then on your risk management plan, you have to have a plan to fix it. So that's the simplest answer to the IT guy. It falls under a known vulnerability that is not corrected. Therefore, it must be dealt with.
Yep.
But then they throw in another area, which I had not prior to reading this. And even reading it again, I forgot they also used a reference to another safeguard requirement.
Okay.
45 CFR 164.312E. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And for all of you who've been to the boot camp, quick, 164.312. What is that? That is a safeguard in the security rule. But that particular one is about securing transmissions. So, Mr. HIPAA IT person, in the definition or in the statement defining why this was a violation, they stated that from January 1st, 2008 until March 29th, 2012, January 1st, 2008, guess what happened that day?
What happened that day?
Is that the day that Windows XP was going out? You know, maybe. It may have been a little later than that. Yeah, it was probably later than that. But the bottom line is, on that day, they started having an unpatched, unsupported system on their network. And until March 29th, 2012, when that unpatched, unsupported device became the failure that caused a breach, they didn't fix it. They failed to implement technical security measures to guard against unauthorized access that is transmitted over an electronic communications network by failing to ensure, now get ready, that firewalls were in place with threat identification monitoring of inbound and outbound traffic, and that information technology resources were both supported and regularly updated with available patches.
Ba-bam.
Ba-bam.
Mic
So-
drop.
It is.
You know what I noticed about that, though?
What?
I noticed that from 2008 to 2012, they're using something that's already out of date. So how old was this thing?
What's a nonprofit? They're using something that somebody donated after they quit using it.
I'm like, it's probably already 4 or 5 years old.
And that's when they got it donated. Maybe it came in on those end of year donations.
I know.
2008. It just got handed down.
Yeah. So
They don't do that as much anymore because this, but
I'm like, this has got to be a 10-year-old device.
I know, and I don't recall, and I didn't go back into the details. I went to the part that we always have to pull out, and went and got it, and hadn't read it in a while. So there, unless you're IT vendors, read the settlement agreement, study the legal implications of the technology versus the letter of the law, they will not know this reference.
Correct.
So, if you have any pushback from anybody that claims that they know this stuff, there's a link to this. This is it's on the webpage. We give you a link to the bulletin, which also gives you a link to the settlement itself. And it gives you all these details.
Yep.
So you just, John, pass that along to the IT guy.
Make sure when you do, you just stand there as he reads it.
Yeah, just print it out, highlight these areas, just highlight the violations. Make sure you include the quote from Samuels.
Well, you know what the guy's going to say. The guy's going to say, "But this is not HIPAA. This is a settlement agreement."
45 CFR 164.312E. And prior to that were the two that pointed out that they didn't identify it in their risk analysis and fix it in their risk management plan. And so go ahead and make sure you use I just didn't bother our people with pointing that out in detail because there you go.
Yep, there you go. There's your evidence.
And speaking of IT vendors or IT guys, because that's what they said, IT guy. Could be a departmental, it could be anything. John didn't tell us. So let's just assume that it's somebody that has technology responsibilities that also thinks they understand HIPAA, and we run into a ton of those.
Yeah.
There is a reason that I don't have time to do technology work anymore. Because I do too much HIPAA work. So anyway, that being said, that's the end of HIPAA Say What, kind of. Because we're talking about the HIPAA Summit.
Yep. All right. We're going to switch over into the HIPAA Summit 2021 news, and there is a lot. And
Oh my God.
so I'm just going to let you take it and run with it, and I'm going to sit here with my jaw on the table, most likely.
Please ask questions when I start going off down a rabbit hole. Pull me back because there are plenty.
Yeah, I will,
in
because
this many days.
One of the first things you're going to talk about that I don't know IT knows about specifically, but maybe even some of the other listeners don't know about it, which is the Stark Law and all that. So you may have to explain that a little bit before you start getting into.
Well, we're going to deep dive into the Stark and the anti-kickback statute changes and recognized security practices discussions and the CISO recommendations in part 2 next week.
Okay, good deal.
Because they're huge by themselves. Just those conversations might even turn into a 2-parter themselves.
Yeah.
But know that we have mentioned the CMS ruling that allows donations of products from health systems to providers. We already talked repeatedly about recognized security practices, and that was discussed. And I will point out, it was specifically discussed by Timothy Noonan, the Deputy Director for Privacy, blah, 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 who said, this is a thing, we're doing it. We're probably going to have to issue some rulemaking, but we already recognize and are planning on how to do this. So the 12-month clock can start any time now. Don't wait.
Right.
So I want to make sure to get that out there. But those things we're going to have to talk about in the next episode, because I couldn't figure out a way to, even now, I don't know how I'm going to cover even just this part that's not that part.
Yeah. Now, just for clarification, the Stark Law has nothing to do with Iron Man. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
It is not the Tony Stark Law.
Are you sure? Because I saw where they had something.
It is named after the guy who brought up the Stark Law, but it wasn't him.
It wasn't him. Okay.
It wasn't the famous superhero millionaire.
Just want to make sure.
Billionaire, I guess. All right. So first, let's hit on the big news. This is April 2nd when this comes out. So April 5th is the applicability date of the information blocking rules.
Okay.
It's a mess. Let me just get it out there. It's a mess. And apparently everybody knows it's a mess, but they won't say it's a mess, is essentially what I felt like. And, this is my opinion from listening to everybody. And, okay, there's value to this, but there's so much confusion. There's such a full lack of understanding. There isn't even a defined method for enforcing it. The enforcement rules have not been announced, but it's going to be applicable April 5th. Okay. The vendors, not fully prepared, all of these things. Here's the net of, if you're in a provider's office and you are concerned about the April 5th date, know these important things. Number one, it's not like this is a blanket thing you turn on for everybody. You do not have to provide immediate access to records for all patients. And that's the big thing that everybody's worried about is, and it's the thing, I think Eric even mentioned it when we were talking with him about information blocking and where do we think it's going. And it's the concern over patients getting like lab reports before they've talked with their doctor to truly understand what some of those numbers and diagnostic information means. I have heard in meetings here in Atlanta that some of the health systems have just turned this on. And now patients are getting these lab reports and the providers have no control over preventing it, and that is absolutely wrong. Talk to the health systems if that's happening, because you should only turn that on if a patient requests it right now, especially. And even then, you have 8 exceptions where you might not even let them have immediate access to something like a lab report. and it would be patient harm. And there's very specific things that have to go into play and documentation that has to happen and all this stuff. So number one, it's not required for everybody. Number two is there's no enforcement defined. So, to define how they would determine whether or not, you either do it or you don't do it. There's no compliance rule required in it. So really it's just documenting that you're giving patient access to their records as quickly as possible is number one thing you want to do, which is also what we've been talking about under the right of access requirements. So make sure you tighten up your right of access requirements and get that time frame down as small as you possibly can. That's number one thing you need to do. The number two thing is realize that this intent is coming and that it should be dealt with at some point. But in order for you to properly deal with it, you're going to have to understand the options that your vendors will give you. And many of you will not have the option to do some of these things due to what the vendors do. I spoke with someone yesterday who told me that their release of information vendor simply said, here, put a link to our services and the patients can just request their records direct from us and we'll handle it for you. Well, that doesn't address the patient harm and the other exceptions because the release of information folks are not going to be able to do that on a patient-by-patient basis necessarily. So if you're in a release of information contract, don't just start handing that out because, number one, you're not required to do it right away. You don't need to deal with what it's going to bring in right away. Number two is it won't allow you to deal with the valid exceptions, so it's not a long-term solution. So you don't want to do that. And if you are a release of information vendor, you need to understand these two issues and figure out how you're going to deal with your clients dealing with this. Mm-hmm. Because it's not the technology piece when it comes to the providers releasing it. It's the information. It's the content that's the issue. And they have the ultimate control over the content that is released to their patients. So know that, and as a provider, know that. Now, on the flip side of that, if you are in those companies, if you are a vendor, you need to put out a statement explaining what options are available and what you are allowing your patients to do. Or your clients to do, rather, to handle their patients. So if you're a certified health IT vendor, then you are required to have this stuff in place. And they don't all have it in place. Let me just go ahead and tell you right now. So you need to educate. And if you have this stuff and you're not being educated by your vendor, contact your vendor and say, I need you to educate me on what my options are using your tool concerning information blocking. And don't take no for an answer and don't read the rule. Mm-hmm. They need to educate you, not on the rule, on what options they are implementing for the rule.
Right.
So the biggest thing is tighten up your right of access. Be prepared if you're a vendor for, your people to ask. If you're in IT, you better start paying attention because there's a chance. Now, it's remote, but there's a chance where I could see arguments being made that the IT vendor, while they didn't provide certified health IT, but as a business associate, they're doing something that is causing this individual to be doing information blocking, so that's something IT folks need to start to understand. If that comes up, you're going to have to address. You can't say no, not unless you can meet one of the exceptions. There is a security exception. There is a privacy exception, but it must be documented clearly. So you can't just say no. You've got to prove no. And as the providers, all of us need to understand the patients are going to contact them and ask them stuff. Mm-hmm. Don't leave them hanging. As the provider, if you get those questions, you don't say it doesn't involve me or you don't have to worry about it. You say, let's figure out if there's anything that I can do to help you provide that service properly, or educate your staff, or make sure that you have an answer if a patient asks for it. So the answer is the big thing that everybody needs to do right now, because most people don't have a clue about this. And if you do have a clue about it, hopefully you're enough in healthcare that you'll know, don't be pushing people's buttons. Don't be making this a thing. Because the right of access enforcement is going to continue. You're going to get a twofer if you lock that down and try to turn that around within 5 days, so that you can easily then say, look, I've got it as close as I can get it, short of the vendors giving me more tools, and I don't have the tools from the vendors right now. And then there's the technology piece, there's 3 exceptions. So there's 5 that are content, 3 that are technology. So again, lock down your right of access. Try to get that under 5 days. It'll help you in the long run. Have an answer for the patients about, here's what we're able to do. We're waiting on our vendors, whatever. Know that there's not going to be any ability to enforce it right now. And probably, from what I understand, because lawyers were talking, if there's no enforcement rule, they can't hold you accountable for conduct that's happening right now, when they don't even define clearly what would be enforced if something happens. And then from a compliance standpoint, we know, what do you have to do? You have to prove it. You have to prove you've made these considerations. Prove. Document. So that's fun. Speaking of the right of access, they went through that. We have been over it again, and over it yet again. The 17th case came out this week in the midst of the discussions at the HIPAA Summit. You know, same song, different verse. They are improper fees, improper access requests by patients, not providing the records that you're supposed to, or not providing the complete records. That's going to keep happening. It is not going to get better. It is not going to stop. There's another piece that is very obscure, and unless CFR 42 Part 2 applies to you, which is basically drug abuse, mental health kind of things that had a separate rule outside of HIPAA, part of the CARES Act under COVID relief included some alignment of those rules with HIPAA rules, which has been something that's been needed to be done for a while. If you are in that world, you need to understand those. And I kind of had a cursory understanding to, kind of prepare people for it. Now there's a better understanding of what the impacts are, because somebody's actually really going through that. Make sure that you take the time to learn that. Let us know. We're going to be doing some stuff for it. So that brings us to all the things that OCR had to say, and I'm going to try to get through those because we are, running along already. But here we go. There's some charts, pretty charts and graphs, because presentations, you got to show trends. So they showed that the total number of over 500 breaches that they tracked. So I remember when they used to say it's one a day. They were running about 352, isn't that the number of days in a year?
Yes, it is, Donna.
Just kidding. I told you my brain's dead, but they were running about one a day in 2018, in 2017, 2016, 2017, 2018. It was running in the neighborhood of one a day.
Right.
2019, it jumped to 511. More than one a day. 2020, it's at 648. So they're running just shy. I think they gave a number of 1.86 per day.
Mm-hmm.
So we're closing in on 2 a day. It's doubled.
Yeah. Which
from
again,
2018.
Reported breaches over 500.
Exactly. Yeah. So think about it, 329 in 2016. And that's when things started getting bad as far as cyber attacks and ransomware and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
648 in 2020, 4 years later.
Yep.
And those are the ones we know about.
Which is exactly double. Not yet.
I know. It's really close.
Yeah, it's almost double.
Yeah.
And again, I always like to point out these are reported breaches because you and I both know they don't all get reported.
It's reported over 500.
Right.
So you and I both know there's a boatload of them under 500.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a reason they don't include those because the charts would be insane.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, because I mean, we've even seen settlements with breaches of 1.
Yeah. So there's a ton of them out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and a lot of these right of access can be a single patient.
Yeah.
They weren't data breaches.
So here's
17 settlements that weren't data breaches.
Yeah. So here's the golden question.
Mm-hmm.
Of these 500 breaches, Donna, please tell me, where are my risks in having a breach?
What kind of breach are they? Tell
Yes.
me. I say, tell me. Mostly hacking.
Okay.
Hacking, we saw this change over the years in the same time frame, basically. We have hacking and IT issues, as they call them, because they give you, when you report your breach, they give you the option of hacking and IT, unauthorized access and disclosure, and theft. And some people might say that a user, somebody getting into my system that shouldn't be in there, was an unauthorized access and disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
Others might say it's a hacking and IT. So I always think that a little bit of the unauthorized access and disclosure falls over into the hacking and IT. They kind of go together. And then theft, if I stole information after I hacked in, it could be reported that way potentially. But these are the top 3 issues. And the scary part is it's 37% hacking and IT, 27% unauthorized access, 25% theft.
Wow.
Now, the theft number used to be the huge number, but we fixed a lot of that by encrypting everything. So everybody that says, well, I don't have to, yes, we always said if it moves, encrypt it.
Right.
That's been our motto. But you've got to realize if your office is broken into and you have computers that have PHI, and we all know there's probably PHI on there, whether you believe it or not. If you go look in the downloads folder and the temp folder and the documents folder, you're probably going to find somewhere PHI and potentially even in stuff saved in the browsers.
Yep.
So if those are stolen out of your office and they're not encrypted, it's a theft breach potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So then, just to reiterate how bad hacking is, and I think it's because they saw this huge trend going up towards the end of the year, because that's looking at the entire, from 2009, September 2009 to February 8, 2021. That's that period of time where they're saying it's now become, over this 10-year period, it's clear those are where the problems are. Now, they didn't just look, and I'm sure it's even bigger if you look at 2020 alone, just that 600 and something number, which I haven't. But the point they brought up is in 2021, so far, of all the breaches reported, which would cover breaches that occurred at the end of 2020, when the ransomware attacks that we knew were coming, 71% hacking, 27% unauthorized disclosure. So, big problem. There it is. It's mostly, coming into the networks via the network server or email. That's it. So they said, look, we're seeing this, and, it's mostly email, phishing, and RDP. Well, not specifically RDP. They said remote access that didn't have multi-factor authentication and proper security.
Right. And the downside to the email piece, and correct me if I'm wrong, but having IT security tools in place is not going to protect email very effectively. in a lot of cases because it's really the users that are doing things in the email that's causing the hacking incidents to happen, even though there may be levels of security in those inboxes.
Right. So even if you have your inbox encrypted, let's say we have encrypted email and we can send encrypted emails.
Right.
Okay. If it's in my inbox, which they will be, and I fall for business email compromise and give up my email credentials, they see my inbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are you at that point.
They are you, and they see what you see. So if you can see it and they get in, so encrypted email only fixes it if I steal the file or try to get it through the transmission.
Yep.
It does not fix it if I let you into the email. That's a big problem. Giving up your credentials to your email in a lot of these Microsoft environments means I also have credentials to your network.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem. Hacking has always been a problem with healthcare. The pandemic has made it a bigger problem. And their point, again, Mr. IT guy, HIPAA requires you to have a protective stance against cyber attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So they are looking at the state of the HIPAA compliance program in all of those cases, as they always say, and they say, here are our recurring compliance issues. Individual right of access. We just talked about that. Improper risk analysis. We've talked about how to do a risk analysis over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a spreadsheet where you complete some stuff. It is not a vulnerability scan with some reports. That is not a risk analysis.
It's a checklist, Donna.
It's a checklist. A risk analysis. And when you finish your risk analysis, it should have things like the scope that was covered, the people involved, all the areas you evaluated, what you considered, how are you securing in the evaluation, what security features do you use in your EHR, what security features do you use in your other applications, not just things that are connected to my network when the scan is run.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a potential threat that we use VoIP telephone connections, which a lot of people use now?
Mm-hmm.
Does that create a threat? Is anybody looking? No, somebody else handles that. What about my multifunctional systems, my copiers and all of those?
Mm-hmm.
What about my medical devices? Yada, 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 on and on and on. That's what your risk analysis should look at. Then guess what? Business associate agreements. Not having them, having invalid ones that are no longer effective or not up to date. Huge problem. Access controls. That would get back to the remote access not being addressed properly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Audit controls. Not looking. If you're not looking, trouble's a cooking.
Yeah, access controls. I think you could have the improper use of usernames and passwords probably fall under that. Everybody's using the same credentials or crappy passwords or whatever.
You're making it easy for the bad guys.
Yeah, and in our organization, we implement privileged access management. So it's kind of a new thing going around. It's not a new concept, but it's getting down to the smaller business.
IAM. Identity access management is what they do in the enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
You are assigned an identity, and then the access controls are connected to your identity, and your identity can change, and so that you're the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And you are identified as X. And when you are identified as X, it means you can do certain things. And, so your identity is assigned, and then all across the enterprise, the other systems then can assign you roles to your identity. And it's the same concept in a smaller level with your privilege management you're mentioning.
Yep. And so we're able to do that, particularly in cases where there's not all those enterprise level or security or not security, but server things in place that are doing Active Directory and things like that.
Yep. That's huge because everybody's gone to the cloud.
Yep. And so, you should consider something like that is the reason I bring it up. And funny,
Yes.
of all the things we have, of all the security inconveniences we have in place, that is that one thing gets us the most complaints than anything else, because people try to install something and it forces them to have that approved by IT before it's installed. Now, we've stopped ransomware attacks. We've stopped employees that are trying to install video games on their work systems. But we are constantly getting people saying, take this off my machine. It's slowing down my ability to do something. And it's so funny.
For a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
we just talked about a mutual person. A couple of weeks ago, same thing happened, and get this off. I want this done. Well, do you want me to let you install this malware? Because I thought that was my job not to.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, and being able to know when that stuff gets done, those audit controls to test everything, and information system activity review of everything.
Yeah.
So we have the logs.
I have to
it's
say,
not good enough.
I have to say something. I had a client yesterday. He asked me if they could stop paying for monitoring. Like, they wanted everything else. They wanted the security. They wanted the management pieces. They want all that stuff. They don't understand why we have to have everything monitored. Yeah, that's how way I look, like a dog with his head turned sideways. I'm like, you want the bells and whistles and the sirens to go off, but you don't want anybody to hear them. I don't get it.
Yeah, they won't work unless someone hears them.
I know. I was like, it's not like alarm system monitoring, Yeah. It was funny. It was a funny conversation. It really boiled down to they didn't understand what they were asking for. But
well, that clearly was going on.
Yeah.
Once you said, "Let me explain."
Yeah.
Let's get on the same page with our glossary.
I think your term monitoring and my term monitoring are not the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, you should have saw me in the first few minutes, because I know my head was sideways going, what in the world are you asking?
That's I mean, I'm immediately the same thing. Yeah, it's a thing. So yes, you do want those things. That would be the, putting the audits, putting the controls in place, and actually, you're supposed to identify what needs to be protected, plan to protect it, and then detect when things are attacking you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Those are the things. And Tim Noonan's uses this quote over and over. This is his thing. He says that the OCR's intention is to make sure that patients have appropriate access to their records while the bad guys don't.
Sounds simple.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Health information privacy, HIP. He said, stay hip. He's kind of nerd.
If you get hip, then you can sit back and go,
Oh my God. Okay. So OCR published what they consider best practices that they want you to do. And really what they were saying is, if you get hit, if you have a breach and you have to report it to us, do not wait for us to tell you what you should be doing. Do not wait for us to say, do a risk analysis or get your policies and procedures. These are the things we're going to ask you if you have done, which, if you're already doing these things, then you wouldn't have to do them in 30 days because they're going to ask you. They gave you the steps they follow. That was another thing in there. But here are their best practices. We can close out on this. Okay. Risk analysis and risk management should be integrated into business processes, conducted regularly, and when new technologies and business operations are planned.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty straightforward.
And we've been saying that for years.
Mm-hmm. It should be part of doing business is to do these risk analysis and risk management plans, whether or not HIPAA required them. Today, every business needs to do this, regardless of the size or type. It's on what level.
Yeah. Well, we've always called these mini SRAs or mini risk analysis or whatever.
Yeah.
But basically, when somebody says, how often should I do a risk analysis? My answer is you should be doing them constantly.
Yeah.
There is not we do this once a year. It should be we do this every single time that we have something that's changing.
We came up with the idea of saying mini to help people understand that giant thing where we want you to bring in all these people and look at all of these things, that needs to happen on a regular basis and be part of your business process. Mm-hmm. But you don't have to tear everything apart and bring everybody in if you want to add let's just say that somebody wants to stick a Alexa in the surgery base. No, but let's do a risk analysis and explain why. Mm-hmm. Let's not just say no. Let's, do that risk analysis and get to the answer yes or no through the risk analysis. And a lot of times it's being done, but nobody's writing it down.
Yeah. Or they're sitting in a meeting and go, does anybody have a problem with me putting this Alexa in the, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that is not a risk analysis. It's what am I supposed to be protecting and what could this new piece of technology do that will cause me a problem with those protections? Mm-hmm. What will this do to keep me from making sure patients have the proper access to their records and only the patients, not the bad guys?
Right.
In this case, not necessarily the bad guys, but remember, you can have bad guys be insiders. Mm-hmm. So bringing that up, next week, I've got a brief story, but it was shocking from a CISO discussion. You always get great stuff. All right. Here's another thing that we also recommend. Learn from other people's mistakes.
Not only do we recommend it, not only do we recommend it, but we provide the analysis of it.
Yeah, and tell you what to do. Incorporate lessons learned from incidents into the overall security management process.
Yeah. But how many times have you had people ask you a question about something? For example, earlier on the podcast, it's somebody says, show me where this has happened before. And, it should be commonplace in your program to keep up with these things.
Well, yeah. Well, not just that, but everybody doesn't have it in their heads where they knew to go to that case. No. But you should know how to find it, which is what John did by sending the thing and asking us.
Right. Yeah, he's got enough common sense to say, I don't know the answer, but I know where to find the answer.
That's exactly it.
I will email David and Donna.
Maybe somebody should make a repository and then create a membership subscription.
Yeah, something like
where you could access and all this curated information from all over the place.
I would join that club.
Yeah, maybe Carden needs to have a club. Coming soon.
More on that later.
If you want to know, send me an email. All right. So incorporate those lessons learned, please. This is all we're talking about. We share with you stuff that we hear, stuff that's in the news, stuff that happens to us, stuff that, they announce. Those are lessons learned. If it happens in your office, lessons learned. Incorporate that and document that you're doing it. Mm-hmm. That shows you need to prove it. Prove it. Can I prove I did this? When somebody asks, that's the thing. All right. Yeah.
So some people they don't even learn from their own mistakes. You think they'll learn from somebody else's?
Well, sometimes it's easier to say, well, other people make mistakes and I don't.
Yeah. Well, that boils down to the kind of it won't happen to me syndrome, Yeah. It's like, oh, no.
Yeah. You ought to look up my blog article I wrote back in the day when I was doing the Small Provider HIPAA blog, which is where I was covering these things on the blog. I covered that settlement we told John about. And I also have an article called Jimi Hendrix and HIPAA.
Yeah, I remember that.
I've connected Jimi Hendrix and HIPAA. Nobody believes it, but I did do it. And it has to do with this topic. All right. So review all vendor and contractor relationships to ensure BAAs are in place as appropriate and address the breach security incident obligations of your business associates. And we need to get a better line in there of who's obligated to do what. And there's things I'm actually changing in our due diligence and our evaluation of business associates due to some of the things I picked up, as well as some of the things that have happened. But you notice that they say all vendor and contractor relationships. They don't say review the BAAs. They say review all your relationships and make sure your BAAs are where they need to be. That's two different things. And a lot of people, when we say, give us a list of all your vendors, well, here are our BAAs. First of all, they're BAs, not BAAs. You know, it's a BA is the business. The BAA is the agreement between you and the business. So if you just give me the BAAs, that doesn't tell me all your BAs. But I'm not asking for all your BAs. I'm asking for all your vendors and contractors. I want to know that you've been through those. And that's what they're going to want to know.
Yep.
Review records, access, policies, procedures, and practices. Access, controls, policies, procedures, and practices. Train your staff on the difference between right of access requests and authorizations. They are two different things. They have to be dealt with differently. They require different things up front and different things on the back. Provide training specific to your organization and job responsibilities on a regular basis.
What?
Now,
That's
you know, and
annually,
people
right?
say, well, once a year is enough.
That's regular.
Okay. That's regular. All right. You're going to get what you always got if you do what you always do. Reinforce workforce members' critical role in protecting privacy and security. How many episodes did we do where we've talked about it's everyone's job? We've got to get everyone involved. Everyone's part of the cybersecurity team now. So I, again, walked away from the conference full of new information, things that I needed, things in the next episode, a lot of great stuff on the security pieces specifically. But I also walked away feeling good about what we're doing and how we're trying to move people forward through our podcast, our training, our services, the work that you're doing, trying to get MSPs educated. We're both working on doing more things. And this just reiterates that we have got to find ways to do more, me and you, which I'm running out of resources to make that happen.
Let's see if we can put in for an extension on the days, because right now you only have 352 days in your year. So if we can make the year a little longer for you, we can get more done. I don't know where you got that number from. That was funny.
I don't know. I just made it up.
352.
I don't know. 52 weeks. That's probably
That's what it is.
I merged the two.
Maybe there's 352 weeks in your year.
No, but 52 weeks, and the other starts with a 3, and I just merged the two. There you go.
Yeah. Just remember, Office 365.
I know, right?
It's
There's a
for
reason they call it that. I'm like, wait, that didn't sound right. Where did I get that? You know? I merged. That's it. I merged the 300 and the 52 weeks. So at least we got there.
We did.
All right. There you go. So next week, really cool information talking about what we've learned from the pandemic and what has to change due to all the work from home changes, plus the Stark Law, plus the recognized security practices, and what I have learned about all those things.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Yeah. Next week.
I know.
And this. So I've been busy this week.
We might have a part 3 on this one.
I told you. There's a lot going on.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, thanks for listening, folks. This has been the HIPAA Summit 2021 News, Part 1. So catch us next week as we do Part 2, and who knows, it might turn into a Part 3.
Who knows?
But remember to follow, share us out on your favorite social media site, and rate our podcast, please. We love it. Help us spread the word. And remember, for Donna and myself, HIPAA, it's not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.